Good evening, folks. Both the folks that are here in person and those in the CAT TV world. I'm Tom Jacobs, and this is the Bennington Select Board meeting of March 12th, 2018. It's a day that's full of infamy. At least that's what my mother said when she had me a few years ago. But anyway, welcome to basically the snowshoe capital of the United States. This is pretty special in our auspices here. I'd like to have the rest of the board introduce themselves before we start the meeting. Starting Jean.
Good evening, I'm Jean Connor.
Good evening, Carson Thurber.
Good evening, my name is Jim Carroll.
Hi, Donald Campbell.
Hello, I'm Jeannie Jenkins.
Good evening, Chad Gordon.
And Nancy Lively, who's our reporter for the Evening In Plus. And Dan Monks, who's in good stead to stand in for Stu, who's out of town.
This evening. Thank you.
I notice how after town meeting, you always get that job. Thanks,
Right,
Dan.
that's how it
We
works.
appreciate it. And also, congratulations to the gentleman to my right and to my left for their victory. And look forward to another 3 years for you guys. And it's
Thank you
special
very much.
to have you on this board. The
Thank
town
you.
is very lucky to have you.
Well, I just want to welcome my second place finisher, Donald.
And that will be.
I'm sorry.
I think you want to recount.
Yeah.
Recount.
Well, I've always wanted a landslide.
It's about as close as you're going to get, Jim.
We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Jim, would you lead us?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jim. I'd also like to thank those folks that voted last week, participated in the town meeting. It wasn't a large number, but we recognize the vote, and it's important that we do as a select board. What I can tell you is that we encourage in a participatory democracy for folks to get involved. And some folks will say the select board is overly involved, but it's part of our democratic process. And I really would like to express the board's appreciation for not only those that voted, but for Cassie, who put this together. It's not an easy process to get a election through the maze, but it was well organized and done. I do want to tell the community that we recognize, while it was a small voting number, we recognize the importance of it, and we will respond accordingly, because we're not just going to take it and shove it aside, because it's important that the board recognize the participation, the result, but also that those folks that shared their thoughts through the votes that they participated in. Any other members like to speak to it before we get into the business at hand? Feel free to. But that was my take on the election of last week.
Just that I think we need to rethink donuts. I got asked a lot about donuts. Okay.
I was tempted to go down and get some myself, but then they never left my office. But anyone else? It's up to you guys. Anybody? Feel free to, but we'll be talking about this in probably greater detail, because we're going to be talking through, as we have for the last couple of times, relative to the charter, and a lot of what we saw last week is part of the charter process. So we'll be comfortable in doing that, but I really don't want to get into great detail beyond that tonight, if we could.
I just have one remark.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think, as I've said throughout the days leading up to the election, yes, sorry. As I said many times in interviews and forums, I'm not necessarily opposed to a mayoral form of government, but what I do think is necessary is that we as a community have a thorough and thoughtful discussion and of a contrast and comparison form of the mayoral form of government, and it's really sit down and think about it. And so I hope that in the future we'll make this a priority in our agendas.
Thanks, Jim. We do have a consent agenda this evening that contain the minutes of the February 26th and 27th meetings, and as well as the warrants. I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion, corrections, additions that you would like relative to the consent agenda?
Jean's got her hand up.
Jean, please.
The Director of Shires Housing, her name is Stephanie Lane.
L-A-N-E?
L-A-N-E.
She's not on the website. I don't like it.
So anywhere her name appears, it's here at least twice that I noticed. Once on page 1, once on page 2. Thanks.
Having,
One more.
And then just the changes on Bennington Downtown Alliance that we noted, so, okay.
you've got that?
I think so.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. All in favor of the consent agenda as circulated and with those corrections? Aye. That's 7 in favor and no opposition. We will now get into the citizens' comment period. Folks have signed up, and do we?
No sign up.
We haven't.
No one
they
signed up.
But if anybody would like to speak to matters that aren't on the agenda, we don't, that signature page is helpful to me, but if there's someone that would like to step forward and share with us any thoughts, comments on matters that are not on the agenda, I will certainly entertain them, and the board will like to hear from you.
Are you going to allow comments when the charter committee comes up? Because I wasn't sure if I should do it now or when they do it.
Yeah, since it's part of the agenda, I think that'd be a good time to save that and then make sure if we've addressed them or dealt with those matters. Okay. I guess we're ready to go into the first item, which happens to be the charter review. And as you notice in the packet and what was advertised and noticed, the subchapters 6, 7, and 9 are offered for comment. We're fortunate again to have members of the committee, the Charter Review Committee. Would you guys come up and so we can have a dialogue with you?
6, 7, and 8, I think.
Yeah. Did I say 9?
Yeah, it's all right.
It's 6, 7, and 8. Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to throw in an extra chapter.
Keeping you on your toes there.
Forced into the tender.
Could you identify yourself for the record tonight, gentlemen, so I can have that?
And I'm Robert Plunkett, co-chair of the Charter Review Committee.
Dan Mallenborg.
Robert Ebert.
Great. Thanks, guys, for stopping in tonight. Hope to get you out before dark, which is a nice time of year.
It was dark before. Something changed today. And I apologize. I left my printout, so I'm going to have to be looking at this on my tiny phone.
Don't worry about it. We're fortunate to have you here. If you need one, because we might have an extra.
No, I think I can use it. And I'll crib off of Robert as well.
Let's get to, this subchapter deals with zoning. Could you just point out, I think these next couple chapters are probably not earth-shattering in any consideration, but why don't we just talk about the whys and the wherefores relative to those areas.
So starting with Chapter 6, it's titled Zoning. Much of the changes that we're recommending were essentially language for the transition when the charter or when the town joined itself together, so that after the merging of, I think it was the village of Bennington and the town of Bennington, the prior ordinances would stay in place, kind of like the common law before the United States was in existence. So 601 was solely for that purpose, and all of those ordinances are now adopted by the select board. So the entire section is unnecessary. So that's why we're recommending the striking that entire section. 602, the language in that is still archaic, and we haven't recommended any changes, but that's essentially the same language for later merging of essentially North Bennington. which will probably never happen, but it's still there in case.
The rationale for the
And Old
first
Bennington.
was Old Bennington and the village itself?
No, it's North Bennington and Old Bennington.
Yeah, right.
The remaining villages
I'm
that
sorry.
that haven't
that's what I
merged.
meant. The village, you'd say. Okay. 603.
603 is simply adjusting the language to fit with the proper terminology. There's no longer a board of adjustment, it's the development review board. And again, with 604, these were, again, it's transition language that we were recommending be stricken.
Then we write to chapter 7.
And we're not recommending any changes to that, although there was some discussion of whether or not a water board should be reinstituted. We had spoken with, I'm not sure if it was, Dan might remember better, if it was Dan or Stu that talked about when the water board had been in place, the essential aspect of it was that the select board should be the authority over the water system regardless. So we didn't look too deeply into reconstituting the water board with that understanding that the select board was essentially the water board.
I know we've had some discussions, usually when it's a hot topic, maybe we should have a water board to defer to. But the final analysis always seemed like it came back to us being this board being the ultimate authority. And why create another layer of attempting to get folks interested and involved when it really comes down to we'd have to pass on it anyway. That was.
It can be hard to populate those small boards too, as we know.
Right, yeah.
So chapter 8's an interesting chapter. If you look back at the charter changes, much of this chapter was not actually part of the original modern charter, and I forget the exact date, 1967. There were two articles that were passed in the act that constituted the Town of Bennington Charter. There was the charter itself, and then separate legislation for the potential merger of remaining villages. Sometime along the way, we don't know when, the second article was put into the charter, so now it's actually part of the charter. And so 802, 803, and 804, and 805, they all talk about merging and existing water system secession of the town. That is all just, I think I called it a legislative archive. Mm-hmm. It's just there, and we decided not to touch any of it at all.
Just leave it parked where it is.
Yeah, because even though the language there is all archaic, if we started to do something that talked about the possible merging of North Bennington and Old Bennington and Bennington itself, we didn't want to get into the weeds in that. So we didn't touch any of those at all. And then 806 is the only real change we're recommending to that chapter. And that's essentially, we learned by reviewing the charter that it should be done more often. Mm-hmm. And that's the recommendation. And we also, I'm just looking for the exact language. Maybe Robert, you can help me out. I thought we had, yeah.
While he's looking at that, I will mention one other aspect of recommending that the charter is reviewed on a regular basis. We came up with 5 years, not only to stay on top of changes, but it's another effort to depoliticize this process, because if it's automatic, no one can question the motives of why it's being reviewed at this time or that time. It will happen on a regular basis. It'll just be business.
That's a good thought. That really, somewhat that rationale permeates this document, I noticed with a lot of the comments, that certain things were done on a defined periodic basis. There'd be less question as to why and the like. And I think I'm referring back to the town manager every 3 years being an automatic.
It's funny, though, there are parts of it that, particularly G, the early voter absentee balloting piece, which is funny to have in here because it's not anywhere else in the document. And so it sort of stands out in this spot as though early voter absentee balloting is sort of an affirmative right in this, but it's not in other sections of the charter.
Yeah,
So it's awkward having it in there, but I can see I think what you're saying is it doesn't do any harm, and taking it out might inadvertently start a controversy we don't mean to incite.
Right. And what I was looking for in the charter review language, it might be that I was having an aspirational memory about having a more, I thought we'd put in language that the select board would have more of a directed charge to the committee, but that wasn't actually put in there. I think that was just my hoping that would happen, because my hope was also that the Charter Review Committee would be a permanent board that would always be there and have to meet, but that was shot down fairly quickly.
Well, there are no volunteers.
Waiting. I'm sure by the time you got to this section, there was probably even fewer potential volunteers. Good. Any questions or discussions from the board on these particular sections before?
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
That was actually one of my questions, was stipulating that, should we stipulate that a Charter Review Committee member cannot serve 2 consecutive times, or, I don't know, some such mechanism, so to prevent people from constantly being the group that does it. I don't know if that's something you talked about. The other thing, I didn't know if we needed to or should, or if it was covered under statute, about the requirement of public hearings, public input, if that needs to be in there, if it's already covered under statute.
To answer the first question, we didn't talk about
Okay.
essentially limitations, and I suppose the board could come up with that on its own. And so we did not talk about that. The other public hearings are required by statute.
Okay.
We had the recent mayor petition. The same process would have to be done with this. The Charter Review Committee itself is just for the town. It's not something that's required by law in any way. It's something that the town at some point had wanted to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Is the question, though, beyond that, should the Charter Review Committee, as part of the committee charter, state that they will have public hearings? Because it's not in the charter.
I mean, I feel like as long as it's covered under a statute, then we probably don't need it in there?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
I guess, is that covered by statute for a meeting for this type of thing? I guess.
Yeah.
I know you
suppose
have them.
I suppose it's 2 things. For the charter change,
We have to have.
there's a proposal, there have to be public hearings
hearings.
specifically about the proposal. We did not discuss whether there should be any required procedures or policies for the Charter Review Committee. The way we did it was we established a certain time and day that we were going to meet, and we considered all of those to be public meetings anyway. And so they would at least be open to the public comments like any other public meeting. And then we did also have, it was on noon on a Wednesday, so that was not necessarily the best time for everybody, but it was for the committee itself, which was surprising. And that's why we did make the effort to try to have the separate later meetings that were longer, either here or at the town offices.
So, to follow up on Jean's question, if the committee had recommended changes and we had decided to do nothing about it, then there would not be hearings, because there are only hearings if it's going on the ballot?
That's my understanding.
It's not a committee requirement, so
Right.
once there's a process dictated once it comes out of our committee, that it's essentially a select board hot potato at that point.
Right,
Before
but if we let it just,
If we did nothing with
Die.
recommendations, there would not be any.
There would not be a public hearing. That's right.
so that's something to think about. Yeah, because, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's something to, it's, in a way, it makes us be proactive.
Right.
So that if recommendations were made that we were opposed to, but residents were not, I don't know.
I think that's part of our learning process and our learning curve, Dan, is that once we get through this, we've had the discussion, but we haven't made any changes to the recommendations that I'm aware of. When it goes to public hearing and the community shows up and says, we love section 8.04, but we really think before it goes to the ballot, we'd like to see a discussion or a decision made on. We can change that before it goes on the ballot, right?
Yes, you can.
So I sort of feel like we're sort of like collecting this information, having the dialogue about questions or concerns that we have, but I don't think the final concern is going to be addressed until and during those public hearings.
Okay,
Is that fair?
Yes. Yes.
okay. Can I
In fact,
ask?
sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
If you look at Jim Barlow's memo, which we'll be discussing later, he talks about the time periods that we have to meet whenever changes are made. And he recommends having those changes done before the second hearing, although that's not even required by statute.
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to hear more about your aspirational dream of having a more directed directive. I mean, would that have felt political if?
I suppose it necessarily would have, but it was, I think, pretty clear to all of us that it was a fairly daunting task to go through everything without having a focus. But that's essentially, as the board had chosen, and also as statute requires, is that the review is not necessarily something that's focused.
No, I will point out that in the charter, it says basically that kind of the universal charge in this is to look at the charter for the purpose of improving the operation of town government. I mean, that's the raison d'etre. That's why we look at it. So we have a charge, a general charge.
Okay.
Whenever it gets reviewed. Also want to make one clarifying statement. When we're talking about possible, term limits for committee members, we are not recommending a standing committee.
I know.
So, okay,
Yeah.
that's what
No,
I'm
I thought you made that very clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions on these sections? I guess my feeling that we've sort of been prancing and dancing right through some of these sections, which have more meat on them, like the 3.4, select board, town manager, and we haven't had a real dialogue about those. And I think what we've done is heard from the committee, and we can have a discussion prospectively, like now, on those other sections, which are not, haven't been noticed for tonight, or we can await, get this notice, the hearing noticed, and then have that discussion with the community at the same time, especially the first one. That's where I think we get most of the meat. And then hopefully the second hearing, have everything that we hear from the community and ourselves, so that when it goes to vote, the town has got a pretty good idea of where the board stands, and hopefully we from the community as well.
I think and that's a very good idea, Tom, that we should, at this juncture, have the public fully involved when it comes to the review of the town manager and the board first, and have it fairly and properly warned.
Because I do think when we have the hearing scheduled, we're going to go section by section by section, and we'll have the benefit of the committee's recommendations, but that doesn't mean we're wedded to them. Those are recommendations, and we're going to hear from the community that says, yeah, that's a good one, but did the board think about this? And we may do some of our own wordsmithing. Because as I look at it, maybe a couple of things here I might want to have, not so much an exchange between the committee, that it's done its work, but maybe some more unique approaches, because they stayed pretty much within the context of their charge. You know, as Robert said, making the government more efficient. And maybe we have different, or additional, not different, additional perspective on certain areas that we can have during that public hearing process. Does anybody see it different or additional? And I really welcome that, because we're going down a road that none of us have been on before. And we're fortunate to have Stu and Dan having the experience, but I want to make sure that we've got something that means something to the town for the next 5 years.
Tom, if I may, just on that, I suppose we were talking about the statutorily required public hearings. That's after the select board has already decided to put changes to the voter. So the board will already decided what to put to the town when those public hearings have to happen. The select board now has its own procedure on how it's going to determine what recommendations they're going to make. And I just wanted to make that clear. I think I just wasn't quite sure if that was spelled out just like that.
Right. If we go to as is with the recommendations, and we have the scheduled hearings, during those hearings, it's basically, I shouldn't say a jump ball, but it could be opening the discussion to a greater degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, but what is finally recommended in the second hearing, hopefully will capture all of the recommendations and or changes that have been presented.
Is that what you're saying, or are you saying that that the hearings are to get people's opinion, but we're not changing what would go on the ballot?
The select board can change it before the ballot.
Okay.
And I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, I believe that it's correct that the changes might have to be made before the second hearing.
They
so
don't
that there
have
could
to be,
enough-
but they have to be made 20 days before the vote, but Jim Barlow recommends, and I think we would all agree that it should probably be before the second hearing, so you
Make
can
sure.
roll out to folks. This is exactly what we're proposing.
Yeah.
And presumably that would be done at some select board meeting, or at the end of that hearing where the select board would choose the changes to be put forward.
Jean, did you have a?
Yeah, I mean, it's taken us a really long time to get through this. You guys took, it's a lot to absorb, and I guess I would just like to make sure that people that want to participate in these public hearings have access to the information ahead of time and know where to find it, because if you walked into a meeting, it's a lot to absorb and be able to participate in if you didn't have it ahead of time.
I would like to remind everyone, especially if you haven't, that there is an excellent hour-long taped interview between Rob and Sean Marie Oler, our
Right.
two co-chairs, in which they talk about every substantive change we've recommended. There's a link to it on the town webpage. It's really worth the time to take a look at it.
Right.
They go point by point. What's that?
Meeting minutes are all there.
Right, and you can go there and you can see all of our meeting minutes on
Right,
our
I know all
webpage.
that, I know all that, but we just need to make sure that everyone else knows that.
That's why I'm saying.
Right, right. So we need to keep saying that, I guess, not just tonight, but at every opportunity.
Well, I'm just wondering if maybe we want to do something on Cat TV that just has that, that silent thing that says charter review, see it
Go to.
live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to.
And then just
Yeah.
with just how the ways that people can get information.
And are these documents,
that.
Dan, on our town website?
Yes.
They are, all of these?
The summary too?
The report, every document that
Yeah.
the subcommittee produced is on there.
Yeah.
And Jim Thurman has attended most of our meetings as well, so the banner archive is pretty thorough.
So,
I would
Dan,
like-
could we just get, I'm just thinking, let's just do something for Cat TV so it just rolls through on a regular basis, that, here's where you can get the charter review
And
minutes.
also that interview that
And the
you
interview.
just referenced, because that
Yeah.
was really, that was really good, nuts and bolts. I think it's important that we try to get this participation from the community. Maybe we have to encourage them with, pizzas or something. Maybe it's time to spring for something like this, because it's an important type of thing. So if folks show up for pizza and then leave, fine, but we'll capture them as they go out the door. And Joey?
Can you explain for people at home, what is the next 6 weeks? Like, what happens next? Are there now official warned meetings that are going to come of this, where the community speaks? Or are you guys going to spend 2 weeks kind of tinkering and then bring it to the public?
I think probably we've got another meeting on the 26th. At that meeting at the 26th, I would like to say, we're going to take the recommendations as presented or as modified. That's on the 26th. And then, is it 2 weeks hence? Then we'll try to schedule the first meeting, or how?
Right, so the schedule, if the board decides they want to proceed to a vote on the 26th, the schedule would be, assuming we only met on regular meetings, and there's nothing to say that we couldn't have special meetings, and probably will need to do that if there's work sessions, et cetera. The first public hearing would be April 23rd, 2018. The second public hearing, again, assuming a regular select board schedule, will be May 14, 2018, and the vote would occur on June 5th, 2018. And the date that's most important there is the June 5th date, because that's the date that the town clerk could facilitate an election or a vote. Certainly that could be modified, but we'd have to talk to the town clerk to find out what dates would work for their office. But we know that June 5th does.
Maybe we could circulate exactly that to the public so that they'll know in order to be participating in that. Because I think the 26th, 2 weeks hence, we probably will say, okay, we've gone through this, heard the recommendations. Are there additions, changes that you want to make? But, it's also, while I'm encouraged to hear we have a plan as far as dates, I don't think we should be wedded to it. If we feel like we need more than the 26th, we can go on to the next week. We should strive for that and maybe have that special meeting to make sure we can stay on time. But as I said, we skipped through, not when I say skipped, went through the recommendations, the sections pretty quickly, and we haven't had a lot of dialogue that we might want to have. And so I think we shouldn't have the cart before the horse. Let's make sure we have the horse pulling the cart in this case. But let's see what we can do on the 26th.
Okay. So we'll set a final schedule on the 26th if we agree to go forward?
And between now and then, you're inviting all of us to do one sort of last look at it and offer changes that we'd like to recommend on the 26th.
On the 26th.
Okay. And just to be sure I understood you, Dan, because I think I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this beforehand. So if we put the whole thing in whole cloth and we have 2 hearings, and during the first hearing we decided, well, maybe we should take this section out. As long as we have a second hearing, Jim Barlow feels like we don't need to rewarn anything?
No, well, the statute's very clear that you don't even need to do it before the second hearing. You must do it 20 days before the vote. He's advising, and I think we all agree, it makes sense, that change needs to be made before the second hearing, and that second hearing has to be at least 20 days before the vote.
Okay, so if we get into something really sticky, say the options tax, and we find that's really difficult to talk about and we need more time, do we set a third meeting and do it in between, or what would happen then?
Well, you'd have to do all that. But if you wanted to stick to the June 5th date, you'd have to do all that before 20 days, or further, or more before that,
Or extract that from
or extract it from the
Warning.
from the warning.
Okay, but we couldn't do that at the second meeting, and still, we couldn't extract it at the second meeting.
I think it would have to already be out unless...
Yeah, I would recommend if we're going to be making changes that if we need to have additional discussions, we should have special meetings so that we can have a fully vetted charter that the board can recommend to the community, as opposed to still be discussing that at the second meeting. That's Jim's recommendation, I think, is a good one.
So our timing's really tight.
It is very tight,
right?
yeah.
So maybe if we back it up a little bit, so there's more than 20 days between the second hearing and the vote.
It could be really tight, or it could be very luxurious. I mean, we haven't had a lot of input, so
We haven't, it's true.
So it's just really up to you folks if you want to push for that June 5th date, and the reason that we're choosing to push, we're recommending that is what the select board had spoken with the Charter Review Committee that they had hoped, and I think it's a good recommendation that we do have a vote sooner rather than later. But, moving it to July or something, that's not the end of the world. It's just, that was what we were shooting for.
I was thinking more on the front end, so between March 26th, when we decide, then the first hearing, if it doesn't happen until April 23rd, that's a month later. So I'm just wondering if we could move the hearing process up a little bit, or is that really cramping things? Because then it would give us more time if something unexpected did come up. Because I think June 5th is a nice date. If you get into July or August,
You lose your audience.
people are gone.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I don't
we-
want to lose the June 5th
Yeah.
date, I
But we
guess.
could maybe come on this
So
side.
we could
of
talk
it,
about
yeah.
that, okay.
You could have special meetings
Yeah.
before the actual hearing,
Yeah.
work sessions for the board to work through
Okay, so maybe
things.
that's
So-
what we
I
do.
see.
If we get
Okay.
stuck on that first meeting,
Yeah.
we
Okay.
schedule a special meeting in between to kind of wrestle with whatever we're stuck on.
Or you could even have meetings before the first hearing for the board to, that could be open to the public. You
Yeah.
could have just extra hearings if you wanted to. These are the required statutory hearings. There's nothing to say that you can't have more public hearings than what's statutorily required.
Okay.
And
It's up to you folks.
I think part of this is to educate, and I think we'd be doing a disservice to the community if we, because a lot of the community just thinks, okay, we've heard from the select board's heard from the committee, and it's moving forward. I think it's important that we get the input as early as possible, so that they don't feel, the community doesn't feel like it's up against it too. So if we can bring the community into the discussion even before, I guess,
Yeah.
the
I'm wondering if we have an easy list of all the civic organizations in town, plus all the organizations that ask for money, and just encourage them to take a look at this and give feedback. I do feel like I would like more than
Than
a
us.
handful
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
of comments that have been made on this.
What's your reaction to this? I know you said, we've done our job, it's up to you. We have no
It's out of
feeling.
our hands.
But
The discussion you just had was the discussion that we had often,
Oh,
to get more.
I think in general, we were disappointed with the kind of lack of public input that we saw.
But Jeannie, one thing you just said is having a list of organizations to send out an invitation to ask them to provide feedback. That is something that we did not do. We didn't have that list. That might help.
okay.
Joey, do you have a question on the process?
Is public input going to help dictate your decisions?
I think we probably should be responsive to an idea, a thought from the public. But having said that, it's going to be tempered by, we've got this work product that's been presented to us, and I don't want and hope we don't have to go back to the drawing board unless there's something really that the committee missed and the board missed.
My only sort of request is that the financial stuff, especially Chapter 5, whether I like it or you like it or you don't, leave it to the voters.
And I think that's probably what,
Stu wrote a memo that says, well, should we remove the specific thing, and it's a very important thing. I'd rather let voters decide than having the select board not even give the voters that chance.
that's the type of thing I would like to, it's in, I'd like to have the select board say, yeah, that's the recommendation. It certainly makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. You're encouraging the board to say, it's there, it's well thought out, leave it as it is. Unless,
6 months worth of work, so.
yeah, that's what we feel too.
It's a good point, though.
Yeah.
It stands out as a sort of significant financially specific thing in the midst of a lot of clerical changes that really need to happen.
And there's one thing where you're asking actually to take out the local option for an entirely different vote, which might happen. And even if that doesn't happen, I'm more concerned about the DID vote on the taxes.
Yeah, and I think there wasn't a lot of dialogue on that, but I think many of us have already come to the realization that it's worthy of being presented to the public in its present fashion. And I think that's what the committee decided too. Whether it sinks or fails, that's another thing. And I think that's why we should have that dialogue with the public so we can hear the other side if there is one.
So the unfortunate thing, given Jim Barlow's analysis of the charter, is that we don't have the luxury of breaking it up into different sections.
It's
We either
all
have
for
to
one
go
or
with a
one
summary or the entire document spelled out word by word.
You're
word
talking
for
about
word.
on the ballot.
Yeah.
On the ballot, yeah, we can do anything we want during the public hearing. But so, the math that the select board needs to do, if there's this particularly contentious issue, do you want to include that in the first round of voting with the possibility that all the other stuff that isn't contentious goes down because of that one issue? And that's really up to you folks to make a political decision. Jim Barlow is just saying we don't get to separate them because it is such a large change. You're going to have to probably go with a summary vote, and you can't have a summary of a section and then have a specific section separately voted at the same time. That's his opinion. Seems to be a good reading of the statute. So he's recommending if you have a especially contentious issue that you think would affect the rest of the charter, simply do another vote. You don't not do it, but you simply postpone it and do it at another time. And that's really up to you folks.
Yeah, and I think we're going to...
You need to decide what you want to do.
And we should be, inviting the community to come and round up, and you can have folks at the mic and telling us why we shouldn't or should,
Yep.
and we could get a pulse on it,
Yeah.
I think. But you're exactly right. It's not like we're just picking one or two sections out to present to the voters. It's basically a review of the entire charter. So it'd be nice if we can pick and choose, but again, we're only voting for one day, and we'd be there for every section by section.
So just to be absolutely clear with me, we couldn't remove that section about, Part 5, subchapter 5?
Local option tax?
And throw the rest together?
You could, but you couldn't also vote separately on the local option tax on the same ballot.
Okay, but at a separate time.
At a separate time, you absolutely can. So really, it's just a decision, what do you want to have in the charter for the first vote? Is everything the
Well,
charter?
I think Joey brought up a good point, and Donald too. I think it needs a little bit more careful examination, and maybe we could just take that out
Yeah,
temporarily.
it's really up to you folks what you think, and you're going to find out.
You're saying the
Say it's only in there as an
Leave it.
option.
Yeah, I don't know if I need to clarify, but I think a main point Joey was making was, with local option tax, our recommendation is that you put it to the voters. With the downtown improvement district, our recommendation is that you expand the tax base. And Joey may be saying, maybe, I'm not sure, that issue itself may possibly go to a public vote as opposed to just a charter change. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying.
I mean, if it stays on the ballot as is, that's great. I just want it to stay on the ballot and not get pulled for a separate thing, for a separate vote. They've recommended to expand the DID tax base. I'd like to leave that on the ballot as is, and let voters decide. That's just me. I don't care whether they say yes or no. I just want that opportunity to be there.
And just my 2 cents on that is, as Dan said, that's a political decision. If you find any of these things to be a poison pill, that you want to keep it in there so everything fails, that works. If you don't, then... but we are recommending that it be put together as a single charter. We put that in our report. That's the work that we had done. Some of the changes need to be changed at the same time, but there are others that obviously don't, and that's up to the select board to make that decision.
Let's set the calendar in progress and circulate it, and then if we have particular challenges with it, we can go with it.
Adapt.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mike, I'm sorry. You were supposed to come in before, and I didn't do that. Okay. Dan, I think you're going to move the manager's report up?
Let's just jump right into the manager's report. Thank you. And Mike McDonough is here for questions regarding one of the action items. Well, there is only one action item this evening. Every year, the Downtown Transportation Fund has an application process for funding of downtown projects. This year, the Community Development Director, working with the Grow Bennington folks and the Bennington Downtown Alliance, is suggesting a grant application for funds to fabricate and install wayfinding signs. There is no out-of-pocket cost to the town itself. The local match will be provided by Grow Bennington and in-kind services. So there is no request for any matching funds from the taxpayers. Mike McDonough has been putting together that application, and what we're asking for this evening is formal authority to submit that grant. There is a resolution that if you so decide to sign, I would ask you to do so. But Mike McDonough is here to answer any specific questions you may have regarding that grant. I do know that included in the packet were some preliminary designs for what those signs may look like. Mike is actually the person who put together those designs, so he can answer questions about design, and he can also answer questions about installation, budget, etc. So if you folks have questions, Mike is here and available.
Michael, come on up. You might have a couple.
Can't be that easy.
We're just admiring the artwork. Mike, your role in the process here? Could you just, for the record?
Yes. My name is Michael McDonough. I am on the task force of Grow Bennington. I am a board member of the Bennington Downtown Alliance, and I am chair of the Planning Commission and HPC. I mention the Planning Commission because it has a requirement associated with it in the resolution.
And the work, was this one of the chapters or hopes that could take place at a relatively early date, and you're looking for funds from the state for that purpose?
Yes, and perhaps a little background.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
The wayfinding signs for downtown Bennington is one of the 4 initial projects or priorities that were identified from the packet of initiatives proposed by Grow Bennington. And the task force and the Downtown Alliance have both centered on 4 priorities, one of which was or is the wayfinding process, installation of signs. The proposal, in keeping with the state grant requirements from the Vermont Downtown Board. Oh, and I guess I should mention that I serve on the Vermont Downtown Board. The work that is proposed under the grant must be associated with either transportation, streetscape, facade improvements directly related to the designated downtown. Now, in this proposal, we're proposing essentially 4 sign types, totaling a maximum number of 26, but probably less than that. The initial sign is a package of 4 signs, which would replace the downtown welcome signs that have been removed because of their age and their sort of lack of present-day context. Those would be located essentially at the 4 entrances to the designated downtown. There is a second set of signs, and there would probably be either 4 or up to 8 of these wayfinding signs, which would provide direction to Bennington's significant features from important turning points within the community. For example, Putnam Square being the most important one. And there would be 4 signs at Putnam Square directing people to the covered bridges, for example, the Downtown Welcome Center, for example, the Battle Monument, for example. All of these specifics would be worked out in conjunction with the grant once it's awarded. The third set of signs would be, and this is very heavy, very important in the Grow Bennington realm, a series of signs which are outside of the designated downtown, but would give the traveling public the indication that they're on their way to downtown Bennington. And examples of where those 4 signs might be located would be one in the vicinity of the Chamber of Commerce for southbound traffic, one in the vicinity of Kelly Fuels on Route 9 East for westbound traffic, to encourage people not to take 279 if they're looking for our downtown. Then there would be a third sign west of town for eastbound traffic and a force sign south of town for northbound traffic. And then in addition to that, there are a series of smaller informational signs which would replace some existing signs but augment those informational signs, such as if they were in a single location, they would be 2 feet by 2 feet in size. They would sort of fit into the scheme of regulatory signage that you see on highways, but would be part of the design as you've seen. And they would direct people to important services and amenities within the downtown, restrooms, parking, bike racks, EV charging stations. And they might be just separate individual 2x2 signs, or if there was a grouping appropriate in a specific spot, as is illustrated, I believe, in the drawing that you have, but perhaps not. If there were multiple locations that could be identified at a specific spot, there would be a larger informational sign that would direct you to those amenities and services. The last thing that I would say relative to wayfinding and signs that welcome you to Bennington and to downtown, in the day of Google Maps, one could argue, well, people don't need all of this stuff to get them to the Battle Monument. They can find the Battle Monument pretty easily. Although there was a time when there was a time when I had someone stop in front of my house and ask me where the Battle Monument was, and I pointed, but it wasn't a very good direction, obviously. But I think that the other piece of this is that wayfinding signs are an opportunity for branding. They give the community identity by suggesting that we do things with quality. We are proud of our assets, and they allow people to recognize what those assets are. So they're a form of advertising, if you will, for public sites, not for private sites. And I almost think that that's more important than the actual getting someone to some place. But both of those things are responded to. An example of the branding piece would be on the 4 entrance signs into downtown. Where now, or the old signs used to say restaurants and shops and parking. One would hope there would be restaurants, shops, and parking in your downtown. But they're going to highlight the fact that we have a National Register Historic District, and we're forming a cultural arts district. And so those are important branding pieces that we think that people should know that they wouldn't know unless we signed them as they came into our downtown. I'll mention we are looking at now a budget, total budget for the project of something in the vicinity of $50,000. We're working with local vendors and with RJ Jolly at Highway to put together both actual costs and in-kind services that could be provided by the town to meet the statutory requirement of the grant, which is that the grant can be for a maximum of 50% of the total project cost, and that grant must be matched in kind by the local community. And in this particular instance, that in-kind match would be through in-kind services provided by the town in conjunction with the installation of the signs, and also the availability of cash donation from Grow Bennington.
Is this a competitive grant application? Is it competitive application?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Okay. So I think there's $300,000+ available in this round. The grant applications always exceed the available funds. We were fortunate enough to be successful with our grant application for the park at 336. And there is a condition in the state that you cannot have 2 or more active grants in place if you want to apply for another grant. We have 1 active in place, so we meet that requirement.
Questions from the board?
No, I just say, Mike, I like them. And how close can we get them to the entrance at 279? I'm being facetious, I imagine
No,
that.
I understand, and RJ and I have had this conversation as well, and Dan and I, and anything located on routes 7 and 9 is problematic to a certain extent, and that is that the state controls the signage on those highways at least up until they reach the urban compact, which is essentially the old village, the built-up area. And so there is going to be the need for negotiation with the state about the location of the 4 Bennington downtown ahead signs. Those are going to be the most critical. State statute provides for the erection of wayfinding signs within designated downtowns.
How about on the New York State side?
Well, that would be far outside the bounds of this particular grant program. But I understand your point. That another separate issue is that there is a need for something out at the 279 New York 7 interchange. This does not attempt to solve that issue.
And then just one final thing is, I've always referred to it, the downtown as downtown Bennington, and you in your introductory remarks had the same phrase. So why Bennington over downtown? Bennington downtown instead of downtown Bennington?
Well, actually, the Downtown Alliance, and I think the town has followed suit with this for a number of years, have advocated for, rather than calling our downtown Bennington, akin to every community, we have always called it Bennington Downtown. Now, there's a practical reason for that stems back to a marketing study that was done years and years ago before we started our streetscape process. And that marketing study said that the most important branding element that we have as a community is the word Bennington. And so we felt that it was appropriate that when we talked about our downtown, that we lead with Bennington Downtown. That led to the Planning Commission's request, I was going to say insistence, but a request that all of the highway signs on the 279 Route 7 interchange reference Bennington Downtown and not downtown Bennington. And in another practical term, if you're looking something up on the internet, it's better to be in the B's than the D's. So all of those things have made us package ourselves as Bennington Downtown over the years.
Okay.
I'm assuming that you have compiled a list of recreational opportunities, sites, cultural things that would be included on these signs, because it would be horrible if you accidentally left someone off who should be on there. So I'm going to trust that you have exhausted that list.
A little more historic context. You may remember that there used to be a series of wayfinding signs that were erected 10 plus years ago, maybe more than that, through a fundraising effort that was a partnership between the Chamber and the Bennington Downtown Alliance and the town. That process included, just as you say, an examination of all of those sites and features that we would want to direct people to. One of the things we did with that original set of signage is that we tried to include everything that was appropriate to include at any choice point that one would reach. That was not consistent with highway standards and VTrans standards. And so in response to that, VTrans asked us to take those signs down, but they were ready to come down anyway. They were getting old. We submitted to VTrans a design proposal which outlined in specificity how our signs would comply with VTrans and federal standards for highway signs. That design was submitted to the Travel Information Council as a component of VTrans for approval and consistent with state statute. Here's the reason that I explain that. We have a broad list of attractions that is compiled in context of those federal and state requirements. The limiting factor is that we can't include every asset at every location. We're limited to 3 choices at any given sign location. I will say that an honest effort has been made to include all of the appropriate assets. But again, for this program, which is specifically for wayfinding signs within the downtown, those wayfinding signs will only highlight the very principal elements that we think are important for people who are downtown. A direction to the monument, a direction to the covered bridges, and then we have the opportunity for a third option that might be appropriate.
It's very, very limiting, unfortunate,
That's
but
too bad.
at the same time, there's only so much that
You can
that a
absorb in
driver
here,
can
yeah,
absorb,
yeah,
right?
it's dangerous to have too much text.
Go right down the line here. Carson, do you have a?
No comments. Thanks for your thoroughness, Mike.
No, you're welcome.
Jim, you all
I'm
set?
good.
I have 2 quick things. Mike, maybe 2 and a half. The first one being, it's great. It's a great initiative, and I really like the look of it. And I'm really thankful that Grow Bennington has taken the bit in its teeth and is kind of going with this. I do wonder if we have, or if we should have, some sort of an MOU with Grow Bennington on this match amount. Is that something that we can leave loose? The way this reads, if Grow Bennington didn't come up with the money, we would be on the hook for it.
If we decided to proceed. In other words, we only are on the hook if we actually proceed with the installation. They won't give us the money until the
The grant could be awarded. If Grow Bennington didn't have the money, we would then have to make the decision whether or not we would put up the money.
Right.
I would say that the grant wouldn't be awarded
Right.
unless we documented the match within the
Yes.
grant application.
Yep.
And so if we run into a stumbling block, but there has been a commitment made already.
Yes, there
It's
has.
just subject to the final numbers.
Some kind of pledge or something?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
If we run into that stumbling block, we would either come back or we would not proceed with the application. And our intent is to fund this through the grant and the appropriate matching in-kinds and cash donations.
Right.
So I look to Dan for backup on this, but I don't anticipate us coming back to the board at some point asking
No,
for
unless we
funds.
unless we're comfortable with the commitment from Grow Bennington, which I am, and we're going to have another meeting tomorrow, and we can certainly have them reiterate that commitment. We wouldn't proceed.
So, yeah, they'll
I
have to
think-
write some kind of letter, though, of intent, right, or a pledge or something like that.
We could
So,
certainly
yeah.
do something like that.
That'd be great.
Absolutely.
That would
And-
make me feel more comfortable, so that we would not be in a situation where we'd have half a grant approved, and then it would essentially force the select board's arm into having to come up with the other half.
We'll need to document a commitment from
Yes.
Grow Bennington and from the town for in-kind services in the grant application.
Perfect.
So there will
Okay.
be a written
Okay,
commitment.
that satisfies me on that one. The second one, I guess, is, are there grant conditions that come with this money that would require some sort of maintenance or replacement of signs as they age? Or is this something that truly is fully funded, and then when they age out, we either choose to repair them or take them down?
Yes, once the signs are in place, they're yours, ours, and there are no grant conditions for what happens to the signs in the future.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's my 2 concerns.
Thank you, great presentation.
Yeah, thank you. My question was about maintenance as well, as we would assume those costs then, and because I like what you said about it. It's about our image. It shows that we care, and I'd hate for them, 5, 6 years after installing them, they start to deteriorate or rust.
Yes.
Thank you.
This is the third initiative?
This is the
Yeah.
third.
What's the next one, just for previews or trailers of coming attractions?
It had always been the idea that Grow Bennington and the BDA would work with merchants within the downtown to enhance their storefronts with floral displays, some sort of potted displays, as a part of an overall but unique to that particular business. And that was identified as the 4th major initial initiative. I would note, however, that there is a new initiative that Grow Bennington has attached itself to. And it is part of the original ideas of Grow Bennington. But there is an impetus through the Promise community. And I hope I'm not, getting ahead of someone and making an announcement or something.
No, it's in my manager's report, so I would like you to continue, so
okay.
I don't
All
want
right.
to address it.
I don't know whether you're familiar with Promise Community. I am not in total detail, but...
So, Mike, can I just, I'm on the
Yes,
steering
please.
committee.
Yes,
No,
please
I'm
do.
just going to say, I'm on the steering committee.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it is, $150,000 came to this community to help improve academic outcomes by third grade and to allow the community to think about how they wanted to achieve that. So, continue.
Well, a portion of that it has manifested itself in an opportunity for Promise Community to apply for a grant for some park improvement downtown. Promise Community, it gets confusing sometimes. Promise Community did some extensive surveying of people in the community, I think addressing primarily families. It is about families and children. That's what Promise Community is about. And one of the very specific but apparently highly recommended components was the introduction of a splash pad or a splash park somewhere in the community. And there was consensus that in terms of access to the residential core of the community, it would be nice if that element was located within the downtown. In its 49 initiatives, Grow Bennington identified the need for some sort of active park space, playground, to loosely use the term, somewhere within or near downtown. And so the opportunity through Promise Community to apply for a grant, and I believe the grant has been applied for.
So the grant was, we were given the $150,000 and then asked how we wanted to spend it. And so a piece of that, so there is something called Catamount Connections, which is a center that's opening in the basement of the Masonic Temple. And so part of the money is going to pay rent there and to hire staff and to get toys and various things there. And then some of the money was allocated for a splash pad.
Okay, all right.
I was not understanding the Catamount Connections.
Yes, it's all, the
relationship.
Promise Community is,
Is the umbrella, okay. Thank you, Gene.
I think somebody's going to ask what a splash pad is, besides me.
It's like a fountain, it's a
Yeah,
fountain.
it's a fountain.
Water comes up and down.
Oh,
They're for adults as well as children.
Mostly.
Yes,
That needs
yes.
to be within the downtown.
I thought it was like a slide you put water in.
Be lit at night, too?
No, and it also fits into Spark.
Yes, that's where this all ultimately leads, is that the SPARK program of the Bennington Downtown Alliance about improving our parks certainly latched on this idea of having another opportunity for a water feature within our downtown because that's sort of a theme of SPARK, that we have water features. And so it you asked what's next. It sort of positions us to move on to another park improvement project that could be realized by the end of summer 2018. And I think that there are grant requirements in conjunction with that. Yes. And it does afford me the opportunity to mention that we've been talking with RJ and our construction management people, and we're on track to break ground for 336 as soon as Mother Nature allows.
We just don't need a nor'easter every week.
That's right.
Thanks, Mike. This is really very helpful.
Thank you all.
One of the questions I have is the resolution that was accompanying the package tonight. It references, and Dan, you probably can clear this up, the municipality has voted at an annual or special meeting to provide local funds for downtown transportation grant. Is this resolution appropriately worded
Yes.
for us?
Yes, that's annual or special meeting. They
Okay.
consider this. That's the language they use in their form resolution, and we've been told that that's the language that is acceptable for you, as long
For
as
the
the
select board
board
to-
passes the resolution.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
I know, it's very
yeah,
unusual
yeah.
language.
Doesn't seem
I had a
that
It doesn't
special,
make
too.
any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get myself. Joey, go ahead.
Well, since we're talking science,
Yeah.
Mike is still here. I think we do a disservice to Mount Anthony Wrestling.
Yeah.
It's up to 30 years.
You got it.
And the signs coming in are 5 years old. With all
Yeah.
these new signs, which are great, it's a
Yeah.
nice initiative. It'd be really super nice to honor the wrestling program, update those numbers, 1998 or 1988 to 2018. It only goes into 2013 now, so it's 25 years in a row.
Can we get somebody on that, Dan?
I'll look into it. I
Yeah.
don't know how easy it will be to modify those. We may have to back for funds, but if.
Well, historically, from what if my memory serves me, the town has been responsible for making those changes.
No, I know, we may have to come back to you
Yeah.
and say,
Yeah.
do you guys want us
Yeah,
to
yeah.
expend these funds?
Yeah.
So, but if it can be done easily, then we'll just go ahead and do
I
it.
don't think we've ever, in the time that I've served on the board, you've ever asked for permission. It's just been done.
Well, this is
I'll leave that up to
this
you
is a
folks, whether we
recognition.
can
I
just
think
do
it's
it.
appropriate. And thanks for bringing that up, because I
AOP will
think,
be on you.
let's run with that. And Dan, maybe you can just report back. to
Yeah,
us.
we'll look into it and see what it
Um,
takes.
So this resolution as presented, can we waive the reading of the resolution tonight?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
And I will
Further-
pass that around.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the resolution as presented?
Aye.
7.
I do have a question. That was so quick.
Oh, sorry.
No, it wasn't about, it was kind of the what's to come.
Yeah.
On that last piece that everyone kind of spoke about, a lot of it was, I was supposed to know about it, sorry.
The
but-
Promise Community?
Yeah, Promise Community tied with a splash park,
So,
dovetailed with a rocket launching, all these different things. I guess one
Yeah.
piece that I tried to find out, we moved over quickly, the splash pad component, I kept hearing needs to be in the downtown. Is that something that I picked up on correctly?
the Promise Community grant for $150,000 is to build families and improve academic outcomes. And it was awarded to the 3 Benningtons, Old Bennington, North Bennington, and Town of Bennington. And so the hope, the idea with the splash pad that we heard from the community cafes was that it was wanted in a place that was sort of central, that people could get to it easily and would be able to enjoy it. So the downtown has been a favored place to put it.
We're not deciding on that tonight.
So we're not
No,
deciding
I
on
would
that
just- It
tonight,
sounded
but
like
that's
there
where.
was already some discussion in the idea of where it would go in the downtown, and I just didn't know if that was public information, or did I miss something on there? Or
It's in the managers, I think it's,
the location for it?
maybe not.
One of the locations that we've been looking
Okay, this is
at
possibly,
pretty closely, and again, it's nothing's set in stone on this, is the Merchants Park.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you can submit, this grant can be submitted.
I heard
or
another
this-
location.
The grants
That's why
are
it was a
the-
loaded
I mean,
question.
this can be advanced before that location is selected.
Absolutely. There's
Yes.
I think there's strong support amongst the folks that have been working hard on this for the Merchants Park location, but that it doesn't fail if for some reason it can't occur there.
No, the money, the $150,000 has to be spent by December of
Spent
20,
or
spent.
accounted for.
Spent.
well, that's interesting. I'm interested in the educational component because I didn't know what a splash pad was. But I think that it'll help. So have some idea of how it goes, where it goes, and when it goes. And I'd like to learn more about it, just like Carson.
I've seen videos of it, and kids just love them.
Really? Okay. No adults? Over?
Jim, go ahead, you'd love it.
Yeah.
I would. You're absolutely right.
Anything else in the manager's report?
That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks to Mike for
Yeah.
doing the
Thank
manager's
you.
report.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We have some licenses to be considered?
Yes.
Can I just ask a really quick question?
Please.
It's just something I've always been curious about, and I'm going to ask. So, child car seat violations, are those included in seat belts, or is that a separate? And you might not be able to
I'm only
answer
going to
that.
guess, but I'm assuming that it's that the child is not properly restrained in a seat, in a seat
Okay,
approved
so
for their
on these
use.
totals, it would be included under?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious how we're doing in that department.
Anything else for Dan on the report, his report? We're going to be needing a executive session for two matters, I believe I've heard.
Yes.
One's a real estate matter and the other is litigation. So it's probably not appropriate. But I also, for public participation, I'll need a motion at some point for that. Before we do, are there any other business that you'd like to share? Go for it.
So sorry.
No, you're not. It's fine.
I'm just curious, this Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the listening sessions, is that something that we've participated in? Is it worthwhile? Does anybody know? It sounded kind of interesting to me. Nobody knows. Okay.
I RSVP'd.
I did. Okay. All right.
Where's it going to be, Gene?
I don't remember.
I didn't print out, I just printed this out to remind me to ask. I don't have all the details, but one of the locations is right here.
Yeah, I think that's why I RSVP'd.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and the other thing I just wanted to bring up, and it was pretty apropos that you were bringing up the signs for the wrestling team, which I'm totally in favor of, is I just want the select board to be cognizant of kids who don't play sports. I know sports are fantastic and they're wonderful, and there's academic achievement tied to sports participation in sports and all of that, but there's also kids that are doing amazing things in all of our schools that don't revolve around sports, such as theater, chorus, band, the list goes on and on and on. And I just feel like I myself need to do better in presenting those achievements as well as sports, and I think none of us around this table would disagree with that. So I just wanted to point that out.
Good point.
Jeannie, I couldn't agree more with you. think
I knew
that's
no one would
wonderful.
disagree.
Secondly, I want to express my gratitude to the voters of Bennington who renewed their faith in me as a member of this board. I will continue to try to do my best and do my best to always represent your best interests. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I too would like to thank the voters of Bennington, and it's a great honor to represent this community. I also would like to say that it's really wonderful when people like the Grow Bennington Initiative and other people get an idea and really run with it. And it really was Tim Van Orden's idea to do this snowshoe thing up at Prospect Mountain, and there were 300 paying participants and people staying all over the town and eating in restaurants. Tim himself went up there and set track in 3.5 to 4 feet of snow on snowshoes the 4 days before. And every time he'd set the track, it would snow again. And he had to go up and do it again. And then he competed. So, you know, he's quite an individual. But a lot of people helped out with that event. There were a lot of volunteers. But it really was his thinking that this great event could really help Bennington out. And so I'd like to send out thanks to him and all the people that have that kind of an impulse and act on it.
Here, here. Base, go ahead.
Nothing.
Gene stole my thunder a little bit with the other stuff, but the Pops concert this weekend was amazing. The students are unbelievable. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, Cat TV was there, so you can go to their website and watch it, but blown away with the talent. You know, I have students in the classroom that sometimes don't say boo, and they get up on stage and they just sing their hearts out, and amazing. And Lynn Sweet and Marge Rowan do an amazing job, and Marge is retiring at the end of this year, so it'll be sad to see her go, but great show if you can, watch it.
I agree with every comment that's been made tonight. Just shows what a special community that we have. And I hope we invite the Shoe National Championship back here again, because it sounds like first year went real well, and it's only going to get bigger and better. You know, our community is known for a lot of things, but we might as well throw in snowshoe championships, and we'll put a sign up outside our gates too. But can I have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, folks.